The K9 German Shepherd. Puppy recognizes the soldier who saved him. What happens next is shocking. He thought the puppy was long gone, left behind in the chaos of war, in a place where survival was a miracle. But fate had other plans. Years later, in a quiet shelter in rural Texas, that same soldier walked in, and what he found stopped him in his tracks. A grown K9 German Shepherd stared at him through the bars, and in one unbelievable moment, the dog remembered. What happened next will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more powerful and inspiring stories like this one to you. It was just another cloudy Tuesday in rural Texas when Sergeant Ethan Cole decided to visit the local shelter. He didn't know why he went. Maybe it was the silence in his apartment. Maybe the nightmares had started creeping back in. Whatever it was, something tugged at him that morning, urging him to take a detour on his way back from the VA clinic. The shelter wasn't much. A small aging building just outside of town, with a rusted chain-link fence and the faint smell of disinfectant in the air. Ethan had barely stepped inside before the barking started, loud, chaotic, desperate. He braced himself, the way he used to when he entered hostile zones. Old habits died hard. A young volunteer approached him. Looking to adopt? Ethan hesitated. Just looking, I guess. She smiled kindly, then led him toward the kennels. We've got a lot of good ones. Some were strays, a few were surrendered. One of them, well, he's special. Ethan raised a brow. Special how? She pointed to the last kennel in the far corner. Big guy, German Shepherd. Doesn't bark much, just stares, almost like he's waiting for someone. Ethan followed her, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. As they neared the final kennel, his steps slowed. Something in his chest tightened. The dog sat perfectly still behind the bars. His coat was the classic black and tan of a purebred shepherd, though slightly matted, and his eyes, those deep amber eyes, locked onto Ethan the moment he came into view. The soldier froze. He'd seen those eyes before. Not here, not in Texas, but in Afghanistan. Years ago, in the burning dust of a village raid gone wrong, Ethan had heard the whimpering, a tiny cry from beneath the rubble of a collapsed shed. While the others secured the perimeter, he'd dropped to his knees, moved aside the shattered boards, and pulled out a trembling, half-starved German Shepherd puppy, no more than a few weeks old. He remembered holding it against his chest. The pup had licked his chin. He remembered the explosion minutes later, the chaos that followed, and how he'd been airlifted out with a shrapnel wound, leaving the puppy behind in a war-torn place he never returned to. And now, the dog in front of him let out a soft, low whine. His ears perked up. He stood slowly, tail not wagging, but stiff with tension. Like he was trying to believe what his senses were telling him. Ethan stepped closer. No way. His voice was a whisper, almost carried away by the hum of buzzing lights above. The shepherd moved to the front of the cage, nose pressed against the bars. Then, slowly he lifted one paw. A gesture. A memory. Ethan dropped to a knee. Buddy? The name had come unfiltered, from somewhere deep in his memory. The dog whimpered again, louder this time. Then, without warning, he barked. Not just a bark. A call. The volunteer looked stunned. He's never done that before. Ethan reached out, hand trembling as he touched the cold metal. The shepherd licked his fingers, then began to pace, tail now wagging in stiff, excited swings. I think he remembers you, she said, eyes wide. Ethan nodded slowly, still in disbelief. I think I remember him too. The air felt charged, like something sacred had just happened. But neither Ethan nor the volunteer knew that someone had been watching. A man in a black SUV, parked just outside the shelter fence, had taken photos. Quiet, unnoticed, focused, and in his hands was a file, marked classified. Because this wasn't just any dog. This canine had a history that no one at the shelter knew, a history that was never supposed to come back. And now, everything was about to change. For Ethan, for the dog, and for the people who wanted the past to stay buried. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. His mind kept spinning, caught between disbelief and something deeper. Guilt. Guilt for leaving the puppy behind. Guilt for not asking questions sooner. But above all, he felt something else. Purpose. Something he hadn't felt in years. The shelter had agreed to hold the German Shepherd, now listed under the name Echo, for 48 hours until Ethan could process the adoption paperwork. But as he lay on his couch in the dark, memories of war and sandstorms and tiny shivering paws filled his chest like a flood. Echo. That name didn't sit right. Back in Afghanistan, the pup had no name. Ethan had called him Buddy once, just once, before he was forced to leave him. And now, the idea that Buddy had somehow survived, ended up stateside and remembered him, it bordered on impossible. And yet, the moment they locked eyes, Ethan had known. Some bonds survive time, even war. Across town, the black SUV idled beneath the glow of a parking lot streetlight. Inside, Agent Victor Hale flipped through a slim file folder with a frown creasing his brow. A scar ran down the side of his face, a gift from a roadside bomb in Kandahar. His job now was cleaner, quieter. He tracked things no one was supposed to find. And this dog? This dog wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Victor looked at the photo snapped earlier. Ethan kneeling before the dog, the animal pressing its muzzle to the bars, paw raised. It was unmistakable. The scar above the left eye, the slight notch in the ear. This was not just a canine. This was Project Reaper. A government prototype. Part of a classified program terminated years ago after ethical concerns and failed deployments. Only a handful of the puppies survived. Most were reassigned, lost, or put down. But this one, he was special. He wasn't just a companion. He had been trained in deep field tactics, human scent detection, and silent attack commands known only to a handful of handlers. Victor made a call. "He's alive," he said into the phone. A voice on the other end paused. "Which one?" "Echo." "You sure?" "I've seen the scar, and he's bonded to a soldier." "Retrieve him." Victor looked out at the night sky. "And the man?" "Do what you need to, but don't make noise." The next morning, Ethan returned to the shelter early. Too early. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but he couldn't wait. His hands ached with nerves as he drove. But when he arrived, something felt wrong. The gate was open. Lights were off inside. He stepped out of the truck, senses sharpened, old instincts kicking in. "Hello," he called, approaching the door. Silence. The front desk was unattended, and the kennel hallway dim. Then, movement. A shadow disappeared behind a doorway at the far end. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, moving faster now. He reached the last kennel, Echo's kennel. It was empty. His breath caught. The door was open, latch hanging loose. There were faint paw prints on the floor, and boot prints next to them. "Echo?" Ethan called, panic rising in his throat. "Buddy?" No sound. Then something caught his eye. A small folded note taped to the kennel's inside wall. Property of the United States government. Reclamation authorized. Do not interfere. Ethan's hand balled into a fist. They had taken him. After everything. After war, after loss, after years apart, they had found him just to tear him away again. But they didn't know Ethan Cole, and they didn't know what that dog meant to him. He folded the note, slid it into his back pocket, and walked out into the light. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. Because Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was the only part of Ethan's soul that ever came home from war. And Ethan would stop at nothing to get him back. Even if it meant digging into secrets he was never supposed to remember. Ethan drove straight to his old contact, Specialist Raymond Torres, a former intelligence analyst turned tech repairman who ran a dusty computer shop out of a strip mall on the edge of town. If anyone could trace a government reclamation team, it was Ray. And Ethan didn't have time to go through proper channels, not when the government had just snatched a dog like he was a stolen hard drive. Ray looked up from a pile of half-disassembled laptops when Ethan stormed in. "Whoa, man, you look like hell," Ray said. "VA flashbacks again?" "They took him." Ray blinked. "Who?" "The dog. Buddy. They came in the night. No paperwork, just a note saying he was government property." Ray frowned. "Government property?" "They called him Echo. I found a note saying Project Reaper. Ever heard of it?" Ray dropped the screwdriver in his hand. "Where did you see that name?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I need answers, Ray. And I need them fast." Ray pulled down the blinds, locked the door, and started typing into a machine that hummed with old fans and bootleg security layers. Project Reaper was black level, experimental K9 units. They tried enhancing sensory recognition in puppies, tactical imprinting, adaptive behavior during combat. Rumors said they were supposed to create perfect loyalty, but it got shut down after some incidents. Ethan sat heavily in the chair across from him. "So, Echo's not just a dog." Ray shook his head. "He's a weapon. At least, he was meant to be." Ethan's fists clenched. "They're going to use Gishin, aren't they?" Ray hesitated, then tapped a few more keys. "There's a transport log here. Someone filed for private transfer clearance under the Department of Defense. Destination's redacted, but the routing station is in Oklahoma. That gives you one shot to intercept before he disappears off-grid." Ethan stood. "How long do I have?" "Maybe 12 hours if they haven't already moved him." Ethan didn't wait. He drove with purpose, fueled by fury and fear. The thought of Buddy muzzled, caged, strapped down like some dangerous experiment. It made his skin crawl. He kept replaying that moment in the shelter, the paw on the bars, the recognition, the quiet plea in Buddy's eyes. It wasn't just memory. It was a bond, a connection forged in dust and fire. As he sped down the interstate, flashbacks returned. Of the night they were ambushed. Of how Buddy, still a pup, had barked just seconds before the explosion, saving Ethan's life. Of the moment he was forced to leave the puppy behind when medics pulled him into the chopper. He'd never forgotten. He'd just buried it deep, along with everything else that hurt. But now the past was clawing its way back. By the time he reached the outskirts of Oklahoma, the sky had begun to darken. The route Ray had given him led to a decommissioned airstrip with a private hangar surrounded by a low chain-link fence. 2 black vans were parked outside. Ethan parked far enough to avoid detection and grabbed his binoculars. And there he was. Buddy. Muzzled. Harnessed. Eyes wide, scanning the surroundings, ears twitching as if he already sensed Ethan was close. 2 handlers stood nearby, talking to a man in a suit, Agent Victor Hale, the same man who had once sat in war room briefings beside Ethan years ago. Traitor, Ethan thought. He reached for his phone and dialed Ray. "I see him. 2 guards. Maybe more inside. Hale's here too." "You thinking of going in?" "I'm not thinking," Ethan growled. I'm doing. He turned off the phone and looked at the dog one more time. Buddy's head suddenly lifted, his eyes locked with Ethan's across the distance. Recognition, even now, even here. And as their eyes met, Buddy let out a single muffled bark, the kind Ethan had heard in the desert right before the world exploded. He knew what that bark meant. Danger. Ethan ducked just in time as a hand grabbed for him from behind. Too late. They had spotted him, and now both man and dog were targets. But they had no idea what Ethan was capable of when someone he loved was in danger. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a man on a mission. And this time, he wasn't leaving without the dog who had once saved his life. The impact of the tackle knocked the breath from Ethan's lungs as he hit the dirt. A heavy knee pinned his back, and a gloved hand yanked his arm behind him. Ex-military, someone muttered. Check for weapons. Ethan twisted just enough to see two men in tactical gear. Not police, not military, private contractors. Government hired, no doubt. And in the distance, Buddy, Echo, was barking like never before, muffled by the muzzle, but raw, panicked, furious. He was fighting the leash, claws digging into the ground, trying to get to Ethan. The moment the second guard pulled out zip ties, Ethan snapped into instinct. He slammed his head backward, catching the man behind him square in the nose. The pressure on his back loosened. In a flash, he rolled, elbowed the second guard in the throat, and dove for the nearest bush for cover. Bullets didn't fly, too much risk of noise. But the shouting started. Get him down! Do not kill! We need him alive! Ethan zigzagged across the field, years of training kicking in. He grabbed a loose metal rod near the hangar and turned just in time to swing it into a third guard's leg. The man collapsed, screaming. But Ethan wasn't trying to fight them all. He was trying to reach Buddy. He rounded the corner of the hangar and spotted the dog's cage, reinforced steel, mounted on a dolly, ready for air transport. Buddy was shaking, his eyes locked on Ethan like he was the only thing keeping him grounded. I got you, boy, Ethan whispered, sprinting toward him. Then a shot rang out. Not at Ethan, but into the sky. Everyone froze. Victor Hale stepped out of the hangar, holding a handgun high in the air. Ethan, he said calmly, you need to stop. Ethan didn't mum. Victor lowered the gun. You're making this worse for both of you. You took him, Ethan growled. He's not yours. Victor nodded slowly. You're right. He's not mine. He belongs to the government. He's not a weapon. No, he's more than that. And that's exactly why he can't be allowed out. Buddy barked again, thrashing against the cage. The sound was unbearable. Not aggressive, not angry, but pleading. A call for help, a cry for freedom. Victor stepped closer. You think you're doing what's right, Ethan. I get it. I do. But you don't know what this dog is capable of. I know he saved my life, Ethan snapped. And I know he remembers. He remembers me, and you're trying to erase that. Victor sighed. You bonded with him, I get it. But Reaper units weren't just trained. They were altered, conditioned. If something triggers him, I'd rather take that risk than let you cage him like a monster. The two men locked eyes. Victor hesitated, and in that tiny hesitation, Ethan moved. He bolted for the cage, grabbed the latch, and yanked. It didn't budge. A lock. He reached into his boot and pulled out a small blade. Not strong enough to cut steel, but sharp enough to jam into the hinge. Sparks flew as he worked the lock. Don't! Victor shouted, raising the gun again. You open that cage, and he might attack you. Ethan turned, fire in his eyes. Then he dies free. But Buddy didn't move like a threat. When the papillon cage finally burst open, the muzzle still strapped around his snout, Buddy didn't lunge, didn't snap. He walked straight to Ethan and sat. Eyes up, tail still, waiting. Victor lowered the gun, stunned. The silence was complete. Even the guards hesitated, because in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't a weapon. This wasn't a machine. This was a dog. A loyal, brilliant, heartbroken dog who had waited years for this one chance to belong again. Ethan dropped to one knee. He removed the muzzle gently. Buddy licked his face. And then they ran. Through the fence, into the tree, into the night. But Ethan knew this wasn't the end. Now they were fugitives. Man and dog. Haunted by secrets. Hunted by power. But for the first time in years, they were free. And they'd fight anyone who tried to take that away again. Ethan and Buddy didn't stop running until the forest swallowed them whole. Hours passed, the night turning darker, colder. But Ethan didn't care. Every bruise, every burning muscle, every scraped branch across his arms, it all meant nothing compared to the weight that had just been lifted. Buddy was with him. Not Echo, not a project, not a weapon. Just Buddy. When they finally found shelter in an old hunting cabin Ethan used to visit with his father, the sun was starting to peek over the treetops. Ethan collapsed onto a cot, while Buddy circled the small wooden room, sniffing every corner like a sentry on duty. Only once Ethan let out a tired breath did Buddy lie beside him, his head resting against Ethan's boots. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and whispered, "You never forgot me, did you?" Buddy looked up with those golden eyes, and the answer was clear. Never. But rest couldn't last. By late morning, Ethan was on his feet, connecting a battered laptop to a satellite hotspot he'd kept hidden in the floorboards years ago. He had questions, and Ray might have more answers now that things had escalated. He fired off an encrypted message. They tried to use him again. Need everything you can dig up on Project Reaper. And Victor Hale. Urgent. While he waited, he checked Buddy for wounds. Aside from some slight bruising from the transport cage and the sore skin where the muzzle had chafed, Buddy was fine. Alert, obedient, and surprisingly numb, considering everything. Ethan opened a can of chicken, poured it into a bowl, and watched the shepherd devour it with gratitude in every chew. Then, as Buddy rested, Ethan sat by the window, thinking. Why had the government gone to such lengths to recover a single dog? Why now? His laptop dinged. Ray had responded. "You're not going to believe this. Reaper wasn't just a K9 program. It was part of something called Operation Sentinel, psychological link training between dogs and soldiers. Only one pair ever showed signs of permanent imprinting. Subject was a Sergeant E. Cole. Ethan's blood ran cold. He read the next line 3 times before fully grasping it. They didn't just train Buddy. They trained you. The room went silent. Even Buddy raised his head, sensing the tension. Ethan stared at the screen, heart pounding. The files continued. Subject E. Cole and K9 Unit 017, Echo, demonstrated unbreakable connection during test trials. Operation was deemed too risky after several psychological anomalies were detected in handlers. Program shut down. Echo presumed dead. It all came flooding back. The drills, the endless simulations, the memory-building exercises the military called routine. They weren't just testing the dog. They were bonding them, ethically gray at best, dangerous at worst. And they thought Ethan would never remember. But he did now. Buddy was more than just a pet. He was a living mirror of Ethan's trauma, loyalty, and will to survive. They were bound, not just emotionally, but chemically, psychologically. which meant if the government wanted Buddy back, they'd come for Ethan too. A rustle in the trees outside made him jerk upright. Buddy growled low. Ethan moved fast, grabbed the loaded shotgun he kept under the cot, and crept to the window. A figure appeared at the tree line. Not armed, not moving fast. Ray. Ethan flung the door open. "Are you insane? You were followed?" Ray raised both hands. "Relax, man. I looped 3 different routes before I got here. No drones, no tracks. I brought something." He reached into his bag and pulled out a drive. "Everything they wiped from your records. And Buddy's." Ethan took it, jaw clenched. "So, what now?" Ray looked at Buddy, who had come to stand protectively between them, calm but alert. "You can expose them, but if you do, you put a target on both your backs. Or," he paused, "you disappear." Ethan stared at the drive in his hand. He had a choice: stay and fight, risk Buddy's safety again, or vanish. Walk away, let the truth rot in a classified basement. But then Buddy stepped forward and pressed his head into Ethan's side. The answer was clear. Ethan looked at Ray and said, "We fight." Ray exhaled. "Then we'd better move fast, because if I found you—" "They're already on their way," Ethan finished. And he was right, because 2 hours away, Victor Hale stood on a ridge overlooking the forest, binoculars in hand. "They're together," he said into his radio. "Permission to engage," a voice replied. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Not yet," he said. "Let's see what they do next." But Buddy wasn't running anymore. He was ready. The forest buzzed with life, but Ethan only heard the silence between the birdsong, the kind of silence that told him danger was closing in. He was no stranger to it. Years of military service had trained him to hear the threat before it spoke. And now it screamed at him from the shadows of the trees. Buddy felt it too. The German shepherd stood at the cabin door, rigid and alert, ears perked, every muscle taut. He hadn't moved in 10 minutes. His breath was low, his eyes locked on the woods. Ethan loaded the last of the magazines, clipped the sidearm to his belt, and turned to Ray. "There's a drone above us," he said. "Been circling for 20 minutes. Not low enough to see, but close enough to track." Ray nodded. "They're testing our patience. They want us to make the first move." "We won't," Ethan said. "Mama, we'll disappear on our own terms." But he wasn't fully convinced they'd make it out clean. He knelt beside Buddy, placed a hand on his neck, and looked into his eyes. "You ready for this, boy?" Buddy gave a single sharp bark, the kind that meant always. Ray uploaded the last files to a secure whistleblower network. "They'll be public in 20 minutes, he said, "as long as no one pulls the plug." Ethan zipped his bag, slung the strap across his chest. "Then we just need to stay alive for 20 more. They made it as far as the back trail before the first shot cracked. A warning shot, into a tree above their heads. Ethan dropped into a crouch, pulled Ray down with him, and pointed toward the ridge. 2 o'clock, 3 hostiles, suppressed weapons. Buddy was already gone, a shadow weaving between the trees. Silent, controlled, deadly. Ethan gave him the signal, a small flick of the fingers. Intercept. What happened next unfolded with surgical precision. Buddy circled wide, flanking the lead soldier. There was no growl, no bark, only motion, swift and lethal. A sudden yelp from the ridge, followed by a scream, then silence. Ray looked at Ethan. "Holy hell." "I told you," Ethan muttered. "He's more than a dog." They moved fast, crossed the creek bed, climbed over moss-covered rocks. Every step was rehearsed from 100 missions Ethan had led, but this was different. He wasn't protecting a squad. He was protecting Buddy, and Buddy was protecting him. The second ambush came near the ravine. Flashbangs tossed like firecrackers across their path. Ray dove, hands over ears. Ethan turned just in time to see Victor Hale emerging from behind a pine, gun raised. "Don't!" Victor yelled. "You don't understand what you're carrying." Ethan stepped in front of Ray. "I understand exactly what I'm carrying. Truth, loyalty, and a life that matters." Victor lowered the weapon slightly. "He's dangerous, Ethan, not just physically, psychologically. You're bonded to him in a way we don't fully understand. If he dies, you could—" "Then he won't die," Ethan snapped. "Because I won't let him." Victor hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then, through the trees, Buddy appeared, panting, blood on his muzzle but uninjured. He stood by Ethan's side and stared at Victor, not with rage, with resolve. Victor's radio crackled. "They're uploading the Reaper files. We have 3 minutes before the leak goes public." Victor looked down. He had a decision to make. "Call them off," Ethan said. "You still have a soul. I know you do." Victor raised the radio to his lips. "Stand down," he said. A pause. Then, "Confirmed." Ray blinked. "Did that just happen?" Ethan didn't lower his weapon. Not yet. "Why?" Victor sighed, looking at Buddy. "Because somewhere along the line we forgot these dogs weren't just tools. We trained them to feel, to connect, but we never gave them the dignity of being more." He looked Ethan in the eye. "You did." 20 minutes later, the files went live. The world saw the truth. News outlets picked up the leak. Ethics investigations reopened. Project Reaper became the headline no one could ignore. And Ethan? He didn't stay to watch. He and Buddy drove west, he from the noise, to a cabin in the mountains. No cameras, no drones, just trees, wind, and freedom. Every morning, Ethan brewed coffee on the porch. Every morning, Buddy sat at his feet, eyes scanning the trees, tail flicking with peace. They were no longer soldier and experiment. They were family, and neither of them would ever be chained again. Months passed. The world kept spinning, but for Ethan and Buddy, time finally slowed down. No more running, no more fear, just quiet mornings and long hikes through the forest. Buddy never strayed far. He didn't need commands. He simply knew. One afternoon, while chopping firewood, Ethan turned to find Buddy sitting still, staring at him. Eyes come, steady. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked. Buddy didn't bark. He didn't move. But in that gaze, Ethan felt it. Gratitude, trust, love. Not as a soldier to his handler, but as a soul to another. Later that night, as the stars blinked above, Ethan whispered, "You saved me. In more ways than one." Buddy curled up beside him, breathing slow and steady. And in that silence, Ethan knew. He hadn't rescued a dog had rescued him. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances, especially the ones that come on 4 legs.